Okay, ladies and gentlemen, why don't we get started? I think we have at least the first technical hookup working. We'll get the movie. We'll download for the third presentation while we're talking, and we should be good to go. Thank you very much to all of our speakers and certainly the excellent questions from this morning. As we had framed this discussion as a behind the headlines, we're obviously, as I said up front, trying to bring together a range of can you guys hear me? I feel like I'm screaming. Okay, good. Tried to bring together a range of issues that are often discussed in isolation and not necessarily discussed as much as they should, and understand the intersection and the connections among them. So we very much appreciate the discussion of population demographic dynamics and how that factors into labor force and economic opportunities and livelihoods, and then a very rich governance discussion that ranged widely across the country, across issues, across certainly address the questions of violence, but also some of the promising developments and innovations in governance. And so appreciate very much all those insights. We're turning now to our third panel, which we've entitled Natural Resources, Demand, Degradation, and Livelihoods. There would obviously be lots and lots of ways that one could look at the kind of complex basket of issues that are presented by Nigeria, by West Africa, by just about any place that you could pick. But obviously, it's a very rich, literally and figuratively, discussion in the context of Nigeria. We have three speakers. I'll introduce them all three now, and then we'll kind of go sequentially like we did this morning and then have a discussion. Particularly since we have the video link up working for Anthony Nyong, we're gonna start with him, and I'll introduce Dr. Nyong to you. It's actually, although he's here just in video, it's a return to the Wilson Center. Anthony was kind enough to join us, I think now 5 or 6 years ago, to talk about climate change in northern Nigeria. Someone that I met and found that we were working on some similar issues, and so he's gracious enough to come back to the Wilson Center and share his insights. He's now the head of Gender, Climate Change, and Sustainable Development Unit at the African Development Bank. He's spent time looking at these issues, obviously in that practitioners and lenders context, also as a researcher and a scientist, including stints on the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change as one of the lead authors there, and a variety of other places where the opportunity to have that intersection and interaction between research and policy, which is exactly what we're trying to do here at the center. Second, just moving all my notes here. Second, we will have Ameto Akpe, who's talking about water sanitation in the context of financial system policies, a reporter of the Pulitzer Center and a fellow. Ameto is a senior reporter with Business Day, which is a newspaper in Nigeria, serving as an energy and foreign affairs correspondent. And it's terrific that we have this opportunity for her to participate here today, in part to hear those insights, and also in part as a reflection. Her work is a reflection of our partnership with the Pulitzer Center. I see Peter Sawyer here. It's been a terrific collaboration with the Wilson Center to have these innovative mechanisms, to have the people who have stories to tell have the opportunity and the outlets to do it. Unfortunately, so many of the issues we're discussing here today are dramatically underreported and therefore not well understood by wider audiences. And so it is terrific that we have this partnership, and it allows us to have Ameto join us. So we welcome her very much. And then last but certainly not least, George Akor is a senior program manager of the Women Environment Program, an NGO in Nigeria. He's a senior manager with that NGO and that program. Somebody, too, who has worked in both the academic and in the practitioner realm. And so we're very pleased that batting cleanup third in our panel lineup, George will make his presentation. So it sounds like Anthony's preparing. Uh,
I'm trying
Anthony, I think we'll turn the floor over to you. They can all see you on a big television screen, and I think we'll be able to hear you. I'll apologize in advance if I have to interrupt you for audio or video reasons.
Okay. Okay, thank you so very much, Jeff, and good afternoon, friends and colleagues. Am I being heard there?
Yep.
Okay. Thank you so very much. Like you said, it's a pleasure to be back at the Woodrow Wilson Center. It's unfortunate that I could not be there in person. I was in New York throughout last week for the Rio Plus 20 preparatory meetings and had to rush back to host a forum of MFIs and MDBs here, which I took time to come be with you this evening. Basically, I really like what Jeff you're doing there, and I'm glad you've decided to put the searchlight on my beloved country, Nigeria. And it's really a pleasure for me to participate in this discussion. I'm going to approach my discussion in a very rather provocative manner because I want us to really brainstorm and see how we can find solutions to issues that pertain to climate change and environmental degradation. We'll also be able to look at some of the things that the government is doing and basically ask, so what next? Where do we head to? In terms of the data, very serious work is being done across the country in terms of trying to identify what the threats are. And models are being developed, studies are being done to show that Nigeria, like every other country, is not immune to the adverse impacts of climate change. We've seen generally that models show that the country is going to get warmer as we get more into the hinterlands, warmest in the northeast part of the country. But even the coastal belt is also going to be quite warm. And we're looking at temperatures of about 0.4 degrees rise every year till the period of about 2040, 2050. And after that, a more significant increase in global warming. What does this mean to us? We also see that for precipitation or rainfall, we are going to see a general increase in precipitation, more in the southern part, but a decline as we head more towards the hinterland. This is an area in the hinterland that is already prone to greater aridity, stronger and more recurrent and frequent droughts. This is an area where people live mostly on the land. Either they are pastoralists or they are agriculturists, but they derive their livelihoods largely from the land. The animals in the parks or in the forest there also will be affected. So we need to ask ourselves, what are the implications of this? My discussion this afternoon is not going to be based on rehashing these stories that we already know, but to challenge us to say, yes, what would we do? If we look at the studies, there have been several studies that have shown that the coastal belt of West Africa, starting from Port Harcourt in the Niger Delta, right down to Gambia, the Senegal, Banjul, in the next 20 years or less, will be completely built up. And judge that with the fact that we are already seeing sea level rise in that part of the world. How much are our planners, our governments taking this into consideration as they design these big urban centers that are projected to span the entire coast of West Africa? Do we believe that the sea level rise will be a threat to this, alongside with the attendant problems of coastal erosion, with salinization coming up? What is it that we are doing to prepare ourselves for this eventual calamity that we believe and we know would happen if that whole coastal area is built up. So those are the issues that I think we should be looking at. For instance, some years ago when I was at the Wilson Center, as Jeff had talked about, I looked at issues of environmental resource and conflict. Last year, I happened to have had the privilege of being with the Defense Science Board of the U.S. military to talk about national security issues, climate change, and security issues. And we looked at the Lake Chad, for instance. This is a major calamity that has fallen on us. This is an area that we know had a lot of water, and we have seen all the degradation that is going on. We've seen the Lake Chad dry up. We've seen people lose their livelihoods, and we've seen the migration that is coming out of Lake Chad into Nigeria. These are major issues. These people are coming into an area in the northern part where the carrying capacity is already quite low, accentuated by changing climates. What are the security implications? How do we plan for this? But over and beyond that, beyond looking at what we may consider to be just climate change threats, environmental threats, how do we formulate this into a national strategy that we can look at and say, yes, we are heading into achieving sustainable development. Right around the corner, everybody is preparing and gearing for Rio Plus 20. Basically, Rio Plus 20 is going to address a major critical issue. How do we transit into a green economy? How do we sustain green growth in the face of poverty alleviation, in the face of achieving sustainable development? I think that's really where I want to put my thoughts down on. Nigeria is a country that has a lot of potentials. Also, a lot of countries with a lot of also a country with a lot of challenges. We still have one of the highest population growth rates. Degradation on its own, we have an issue where climate change is causing environmental degradation. We have shortages of water, precipitation is declining as we head up into the hinterland, and because of that, we do not have sufficient groundwater recharge to sustain our ecosystems. And then this is also largely impacted or negatively impacted by the fact that Nigeria also has a very large population with a very high population growth rate. So when we combine these two, we realize that this is a recipe for disaster. What is it that we need to do as a continent or as a country to ensure that our growth path moves away from what we are currently developing, that our growth path moves away from the developmental pathway of the currently developed economies? How do we take into consideration our rich ecosystem? How do we preserve our biodiversity in the face of a changing climate? How do we preserve our ecosystem in the face of a changing climate? How do we preserve our environment and factor this into a developmental pathway that we will consider to be sustainable? What are the opportunities for Nigeria to transit into a green economy? What are the opportunities that we have that will propel us to sustain growth that would be considered green growth? The federal government of Nigeria, I'm aware, is beginning to put in measures in place. The African Development Bank, where I work for, last year, we embarked on developing an infrastructure master plan for the country that addresses the issues of climate change. an infrastructure master plan that will transit Nigeria into a green economy. That is important. But do we have the willpower? Do we have the political will to actually want to transform this this master plan into reality? We have abundant natural resources. How can we wean ourselves from the dependence on oil? How can we wean ourselves from the dependency on fossil fuels so that we can develop the wind power that we have in the southwest part of Nigeria, that we can develop the abundant solar resources that we have, or that we can sustainably develop the abundant biomass that we have in the southern part of the country to generate clean electricity and energy for us. So like I said, what I actually want to do in today's session is to challenge us and let's have a fruitful discussion. It's not about the science. We all know the science. We all know the threats facing Nigeria, like every other country. But what we need to think about is how would the country transit into a green economy? How can we break this dependence? Yes, we're polluting. Yes, Nigeria is flaring gas. And we know that this gas flaring is contributing significantly to greenhouse gas emissions and causing global warming that is not only affecting us, but it's a global phenomenon. What can we do as a country? And that's why I'm putting this on the table, that we need to begin to think about how can Nigeria sustain a green development pathway at this point, such that we can look around and say, yes, that we are addressing the issue of climate change and at the same time addressing the issues of resource degradation, because we are beginning to think about more sustainable use of our resources, and that we are beginning to think about addressing the adverse impacts of climate change, and that we are also addressing the rate at which we emit greenhouse gas. And our greenhouse gas emission in Nigeria largely comes from the oil sector. This is a sector we have been so dependent on that it's basically freezing our ability to tap the other potentials that we have in the country. We need to come up with a plan. I have not seen any plan yet for the country that sustainably addresses this issue, that how can Nigeria transit itself into a green economy other than the infrastructure master plan that I said the African Development Bank is developing. The Vision 2020 that Nigeria developed is short on this. If that is our current developmental paradigm, then I think there is something that we need to do further. We have a Vision 2020 to be among the 20 most developed countries in the year 20, or by the year 2020. How much does that document address issues of green development? How much does that document address climate change challenges? I must say that it's been very weak on it. And this is the time for us to look back and say we cannot continue on the developmental paradigm that we've chosen for ourselves. Nigeria has great potentials, has great opportunities, has abundant natural and human resources to be able to challenge us to move forward. And I think with that, I'll rest my case, like I would say, and stay on for the whole duration and be able to participate in the discussions, answer questions that may come in, and then throw more inlights or throw more light into whatever it is that might be thrown at me as by way of discussion. So thank you very much, and thanks for your attention.
Thank you very much, Anthony. Appreciate it. It's always nice when the technology actually works. Let's go next to Meto, and in fact, Meto and George, if you want to both come up, you're welcome to join me up here. And we'll make a switch on the slides. Almost done.
She's got to present first, and then we're going to.
Okay, yeah, but oh, I see. That's the, so that is for this one.
Yeah.
Ah, I gotcha. Okay, yeah, it's almost done. Very good. Please, floor is yours.
Thank you. It's so nice to be here. My name is Ameto Akpe, and I'm a reporter. I've been asked to speak about water and sanitation within the context of the financial management structure in Nigeria. That's actually almost a year ago. That's a project I've been pursuing with the support of the Pulitzer Center on Crisis Reporting. Water and sanitation isn't really the hot topic. In Nigeria, it's not an issue that is really being prioritized by the government, and even in the media, you don't hear it being reported as much as other issues like oil and gas and, of course, security or terrorism. Every year, almost 200 kids under the age of 5 die from drinking unsafe water. Many more fall terribly sick from water-related diseases like cholera, dysentery, and typhoid fever. And a lot of times when you hear the statistics, it seems very abstract, but this is actually happening. Not funny, but just late last night, a friend of mine called me, and he was like, do you know so-so person? Apparently, this individual was a former classmate of mine, went to the university together. And he was like, just a couple of days ago, she died. And I'm like, really, what happened? Apparently, she died of typhoid fever. So it's happening. People are dying because they don't have access to clean drinking water, or they are drinking water that isn't properly treated. And in a short while, you'll be able to watch a video. This video was produced by Mr. Steve Sapienza, and he's right here. Give a wave, Steve. And we'll be able to watch that video. The video was produced based on the series of reports I produced on water and sanitation, and those stories can be seen on the website of the Pulitzer Center and Business Day as well. And basically, the news piece highlights the fact that contrary to what many may think, the problem of or the water and sanitation crisis, and indeed it is a crisis, is less about the lack of the resource or even the lack of funds, and more about poor and faulty management, failures that have dramatic consequences for lives, livelihoods, and development. You'll see a clear example of faulty planning with a town that sits on the banks of the River Benue. The River Benue is one of our major rivers in Nigeria, yet water supply in this town is largely absent, and where it is present is very erratic, and reports of it being of very poor quality. In the course of my presentation, and it will be very short, I promise you, I'll highlight the stories I noted I've done. One of the stories I did was on the Greater Makurdi Waterworks. Makurdi is a town is the capital city of a state in the central part of Nigeria, a state called Benue State. The state is actually derives its name from the river, the major river I spoke about. And the Greater Makurdi Waterworks was just recently commissioned by the president and makes lots of fanfare, and it's being hailed as the solution to the water problems of the people. However, the crucial infrastructure that would distribute that water to the people remains absent. In other words, the waterworks is there, but most people would not still get access to clean drinking water. And then when you ask the authorities why this is not in place, you hear nonchalant answers like, we didn't think about it, which is something, it's not peculiar to one state, it's something you see over and over again in the system. The reason why improving access to safe water in Nigeria remains painfully slow are wide-ranging, they are complex and complicated by corruption that pervades every sector of the economy. Critically, issues with poor operation and maintenance, inept institutions, insufficient technical capacity, and persistent implementation failure are tied into the fact that the financial management structure in the water sector, and indeed every other sector in the Nigerian economy, remains opaque. And I know this has been well addressed or talked about by other panelists, and I think even more eloquently addressed than I can do justice to. Accountability and transparency remains absent. The Nigerian water sector is managed by three tiers of government. This monopoly, minus the culture of accountability and transparency, produces a circumstance which promotes the shortcomings so prevalent in the subsector. And if I may go back again to the story I did on the Greater Makurdi Water Works, almost a decade ago, the first contract for this the first contract was signed for this project, and it was valued at about 6 billion naira, and almost half of that, the figure for that contract was awarded to the contractors. However, many years later, nothing was done. There was nothing on site of this waterworks. And then you ask, fine, where is that money? And nobody can give you a good enough answer, and nobody is being pursued on that issue. And those are one of the issues that is a clear reflection again of the lack of accountability and the fact that the financial management structure indeed is not transparent. Sources within the Federal Ministry of Water Resources have confirmed that nobody really knows how much of budgeted funds truly end up in the system. For indeed, there is no clear mechanism to track funds or expenditure. Nobody has been tracking, yes, what has been spent. So expectedly, there is no real data on that fact, on what is exactly being spent. It is estimated that about $500 million ends up in the sector, but that is based on very rough estimates, and nobody can really clarify. And the fact that so many people remain without access to clean drinking water sort of confirms that I don't think that much money is coming into the sector. Though the government notes that to bring the water sector to par, you will need about $2.5 billion annually being invested into the sector, but the sector currently isn't attracting even half of that amount of money. Another major issue is the fact that the local governments, which is the closest tier of government to the people, are weak in terms of they are not strengthened enough to provide this crucial service to the people. Funds flow down monthly via the states to the local government from the federation account. Notably, the bulk of the local government revenue is sourced through this means, with the local government having little control over it. Funds released to the local government come from the joint account of the state and the local government. The state governments control the joint account where the funds are kept, releasing them at their own discretion instead of based on the requisite vertical and horizontal criteria that exist. There is evidence of monthly payments to all tiers of government since 2003. However, and then the percentage meant for the local government is usually transferred from the federation account to the state account. However, there's no tangible evidence that the state transfers same percentage to the local government, as they remain without adequate capacity in financial management and planning. Then the budget process at the local level is also quite loop-sided and often not respected, with cases where such processes simply do not exist at all. And this mirrors a trend really in many states. There's not so, well, it's quite recent. It was released in 2010, a report by WaterAid. It's called The Effective Financing of Local Governments to Provide Water and Sanitation Services. And based on data from that report, a particular state in the eastern part of Nigeria, as of April 2007, for example, budgets for 2006 were yet to be approved at the state level, while all the funds allocated to the different sectors had already, the water sector included, had already been spent, making, of course, a mockery of the budgetary process and the budgeting calendar. Auditing by the state is carried out irregularly, and then sanctions for mismanagement are rarely imposed. Very little information on budgets and financial activities during the course of the year is provided, though there has been in recent times more efforts to publish allocations to the various sectors of the economy. However, you still do not have clear information on how is this money being spent. There is no transparency in that the people don't really know the allocations to the different categories of spending and what revenues really accrue and how donor support or other public funds are utilized. Then even when figures are published or authorities make boastings of provisions made to the people, declarations in no way match reality on ground. For example, and forgive me, I will still use the Greater Makurdi Water Works. The authorities note and they say, this is the answer to the, this is the solution to the problems of water in the community. However, as long as the distribution network isn't there, most people won't get the benefits that very laudable project is supposed to provide. A year ago, or a little over a year ago, the government promised that by 2015, 75% of Nigerians will have access to clean drinking water. However, the elements that will ensure that would happen is yet to be put in place. Since 2010, the budget for the water sector has consistently been slashed. And as I speak to you, the budget for the water sector is 65% less than what it used to be. So you kind of, it's kind of hard to believe that really in 2015, 75% of the population will indeed have access to clean drinking water. Based on the United Nations study released recently, the GMP report, based on our pace in terms of providing clean drinking water to people in Nigeria, it will take us at least 28 years to get clean drinking water. It is plain to anyone who bothers to look that so many actors, officials within the government are not really good stewards of public funds. There is no popular participation and faithfulness to the implementation of the budget. When it comes to public expenditure management, there is no commitment to the two major elements of good governance, which is transparency and accountability. But then I should add that budget transparency will only be meaningful if a large enough number of knowledgeable citizens take this information and hold government accountable. I often wonder why people who have suffered the lack of access to clean drinking water for years, and they've waited through the unfulfilled promises of one government to the other, don't take a more active role in holding the people accountable. But then, as other speakers have noted, the tide is changing. Change is indeed coming. People are more aware of their rights, and people are taking more conscious efforts in their destinies, so to say. Personally, I think by collaborating with the Political Center, I took advantage of a larger platform to tell my story and indeed to tell the story of Nigeria in terms of the water and sanitation conditions. I believe information is power, and the more these sort of stories are aired, the more I think change will come. People will be more active in the discussion. So we'll just take 4 minutes. The video is very short, just 4 minutes to look at that news piece, which sort of highlights the stories I spoke about.
Next tonight from West Africa, a look at the challenges of getting the most basic resource, water, to people who need it. Special
Sorry, folks, we have a video, but we want to make sure you can actually hear it, too. Sorry, I'm missing a plug. Figure out where it was coming from.
Look at the symbol for earphones.
Yeah. Well, I need something. Yeah, unfortunately, I don't have that plug to stick into that. I was just going to try to find where it's coming out here and put the mic on it. But bear with me for 1 second. It's just not very loud on its own.
Does anybody bring a 14-year-old?
Steve Sapienza partnered with investigative journalists in 2 nations, Ghana and Nigeria.
You're not really picking that up, I
what's
assume, right?
behind the water shortages. His story is part of a collaboration with the Pulitzer Center on Crisis Reporting.
Every day, millions of people across a wide swath of West Africa struggle to get access to clean and safe drinking water. The World Health Organization estimates that more than 1,000 people in the region die each day from illnesses related to unsafe water. Shortages also hamper
Can you hear in the back, or is it just
in 2
should I
of the
stop?
biggest and richest nations of the region,
You can't hear it?
Nigeria
Okay.
and Ghana.
I don't want
Pollution, political unrest.
show all the good stuff. Are AV guys able to help us?
I don't know if he says he can hear it, but he can't hear it.
Yeah, well, they can't hear it in the back, unfortunately.
What if we just have a handheld mic earlier?
Well, I just can't figure out where on the computer it's coming. No, that's the thing. Sorry, folks.
I'm just coming with this thing now.
That's right, the real expertise. Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
Do that here. I'll mute it. Mute it? No, I don't want to mute it. It just doesn't show you.
Yeah. Did you mute? What has happened? Where is the audio? It should be working.
Well, it did work before.
The World Health Organization
So what does that mean?
Next tonight, from West Africa, a look at the challenges of getting the most basic resource, water, to people who need it. Special correspondent Steve Sapienza partnered with investigative journalists in 2 nations, Ghana and Nigeria, as they searched for what's behind the water shortages. His story is part of a collaboration with the Pulitzer Center on Crisis Reporting.
Every day, millions of people across a wide swath of West Africa struggle to get access to clean and safe drinking water. The World Health Organization estimates that more than 1,000 people in the region die each day from illnesses related to unsafe water. The shortage is also hampering development here. In 2 of the biggest and richest nations of the region, Nigeria and Ghana, pollution, political unrest, and corruption have contributed to water shortages for decades. What's different today is that a new generation of West African journalists is trying to hold government officials accountable for the failures. We followed 2 of them, Nigeria's Ameter Akpe and Ghana's Samuel Ajiman, as they did their jobs. As a reporter for Nigeria's Business Day newspaper, Ameter's stories target the contradiction of a country with immense oil wealth and great water resources that are not reaching their citizens. We met in Abuja and traveled 6 hours by car to Makurdi, the capital of Benue State in north-central Nigeria.
The River Benue, which is one of the major rivers of Nigeria, runs through this town. The town sits on the banks of this major resource. However, the town brings to life a common proverb which says, "You sit by the riverside, yet you wash your hands with spittle."
Ameter chose to focus her reporting here on the Greater Makurdi Waterworks project. It's the latest government attempt to expand delivery of treated water from the Benue River to 600,000 residents, the majority of whom have waited decades to receive water from city pipes. The previous attempt to build a water treatment plant ended in scandal in 2008, with an unfinished treatment facility and city officials unable to account for $6 million. This failure impacts hundreds of thousands of residents outside the reach of the city's old pipe network, who now pay high prices for water delivery from tanker trucks or water pump operators. And those who can't afford water delivery collect untreated water from the Benue River.
I visited here and I was shocked by what I saw. People were actually scooping water from the Benue River, which is massively polluted. And there are several occurrences every year of people dying of cholera, falling terribly sick from dysentery, typhoid fever.
The water minister of Benue State says the remedy is finishing the Greater McCurdy Waterworks.
So in other words, this is an answer to the problem of water in the...
This is the answer to the problems of water in Makurdi. Now, we have built the water works. This water has to be sent out to the people.
But to do that, McCurdy needs a larger pipe network and one that is in good condition.
These pipes have corroded, and so they cannot withstand any pressure of water coming out of the new treatment plant. So you have them busting all over the place.
Former Coca-Cola executive Nat Appier is now an independent water engineer. He says the new water treatment plant will produce enough water, but it will have nowhere to go.
The coverage of the pipes that were laid about 30 years ago is just about 25 to 30% of the metropolis and its environs. Hence the need to lay new pipe networks.
Facing public criticism about the pipes, the government has asked contractors to submit proposals to expand the pipe network.
Is there any time frame?
Well,
Because people are waiting, people are expectant.
No, don't worry, don't worry. In the next 6 months or 12 months, maybe even, it's far. We were expecting that by the time we start pumping the water out.
Experts say it may blow and...
Pipe busting, and we want to see that.
Okay.
We want to see that.
Okay, you want to see that before you intervene. It brings to mind an occurrence which in the early 90s, in another locality very close to Makurdi, this great water project was commissioned. However, the day it was test run, the whole town was flooded because the pipes busted, because some people say faulty technical work.
Terrific. Well, thank you very much, and apologies for our technical challenges, but I think we did, with some patience, get a chance to listen to that, and I wish every interviewer was as straightforward and to the point with their ministers as you and Steve were able to capture there. So congratulations to both of you. George, I think we're going to turn the floor over to you for final presentation. And then we'll go to discussion. Sorry, yeah, I stole your microphone.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, Joe. I want to thank my previous presenters. What I'm going to present today, let me start by saying it is not a work of science. It is purely based on work on the ground. I must also say that I am honored to be here. I want to thank the Woodrow Wilson Center for this opportunity. It is good that once in a while we focus on issues behind or beyond the headlines. I'm also honored to be here with my colleagues. Priscilla Achakpa made herself, easily recognizable with some of her interventions earlier in the previous panels. She's here. Of course, Atta Benson is also here. I believe that in the course of the discussions that would follow this presentation, they also would have insights into what I am going to say. The reflection would draw a lot from what has been previously presented by my two presenters. There is a sort of correlation with the points Tony made earlier and what the video we watched and the presentation that we had just listened to. So let's... Yeah. I am going to hinge this presentation on a number of messages, 4 messages actually, which are going to be sort of pegs, 4 pegs that are going to hold the reflections that are going to come forth from this presentation. And the first message is that progress in human development is threatened by environmental and inequality trends. The second message comes from the Office of the MDGs, the Millennium Development Goals, the report that was produced by this office in Nigeria. And it has something to say about climate change. And that climate change has direct, indirect consequences for the MDG targets on gender equality and women empowerment. Climate change impacts such as water scarcity and failing agricultural productivity may disproportionately affect women and girls. Now, this is the major point of departure in my presentation, because my presentation is, as you've seen, the topic is going to focus on women and livelihoods, and of course, having a direct link with environmental security. The third message: gender inequalities are associated with greater environmental degradation. And the fourth message: environmental crisis and gender conditions which render conflict and insecurity the more likely. Recall the presentation we had earlier on conflict in Nigeria. They can serve to determine the source of conflict, reshape the nature of conflict, and act as multipliers that aggravate the core causes of conflict. And I go back to the same NDG report on what I have tagged the MDG's Nigeria acknowledgement, because the MDG office itself acknowledges this fact. And what is this fact? Nigeria is among those with the highest levels of inequality in the world, and that this inequality reflects widening gaps in income and gender access to economic and social opportunities, growing inequality between and within rural and urban populations, and widening gaps between economies in different parts of the Federation. Now, I mean, we've seen there's a vast indication of inequality in Nigeria. And if you go through a lot of literature, if you go through research that has been done, my organization, Women Environmental Program, has been produced a lot of documentation on inequality. And this is a clear fact that there is inequality in Nigeria, inequality most especially in gender. And this plays out in income distribution and different access to basic infrastructure, education, training, and job opportunities. Of course, the government in itself is not sitting by with its hands folded. There has been a response in government circles by way of policy formulation that addresses the issue of inequality, especially or particularly as gender is concerned. And there has been this national gender policy that has been produced and is at various stages now of implementation with the lead Ministry of Women Affairs that is focusing on trying to bridge these inequality gaps between genders on different sectors of the economy, different sectors of the social and cultural and economic aspects of the country. Quite a number of Nigeria's population is living in rural areas, and their occupation is directly connected to the land. Now, there has been this massive rural-urban drift, but then that does not take away the fact that quite a number of the country's population live in the remotest parts, in the hinterlands of the country, and basically their livelihoods is connected to the land. And by that I mean agriculture. Of course, when you look at the non-oil sector in the country in terms of gross domestic product, agriculture stands out. And a lot of people who are involved in agricultural production, be it in crop production or in livestock production, live in the rural areas. And this spans across the different ecological zones in the north, from the Sahel in the northern part of the country down to the mangrove rainforests in the southern part of the country. And depending on which areas that you see, you focus on in Nigeria, you would see a production of different kinds of crops, which I have highlighted in the slide there. The agricultural GDP is contributed by crops, it's 85%, livestock, 10%, fisheries, 4%, and forestry, 1%. Nigeria has very large cultivable land for agricultural activities. About 33 million hectares are currently under cultivation. Similarly, the estimated 3.14 million hectares of irrigable land area, only about 220,000 hectares is utilized, and there are reasons for that. Now, women make up some 60 to 80% of the agricultural labor force in Nigeria. They play a very important role in this sector. They constitute the bulk of activities that are carried out in the agri sector, and in the labor force, they play roles in maintaining and strategically using available land and natural resources made available to them. But of course, they don't own this land because Nigeria is largely a patrilineal society. The customs and makes it, and then of course the law with respect to land use makes it difficult for women to access land directly. Now, what are the key environmental challenges in Nigeria? And I've tagged that Beauty and the Beast. A beautiful landscape, but yet it's bedeviled by a number of challenges. And one of these, population pressure, the first presentation focused on that. And this has a profound effect on how land is used. And then, of course, this the process or the reality of drought and desertification in the northern part of the country plays a part in this. There is severe gully erosion in some eastern and northern states, coastal and marine erosion, land subsidence in the coastal and riverine states, flooding in the low-lying belt of the mangrove and fresh swamps around the coastal areas. And then, of course, the big problem of uncontrolled logging with the inherent problems of that's associated with destruction of biodiversity. And you would see shortly why this logging is carried out. Now, I have a pictorial representation here, 4 pictures actually. The one to the top left shows the high rates of gully erosion in the eastern part of the country. To the top right, flooding, which washed away huge areas of farmland in the northern part of the country. This was last year. And then, of course, on the bottom there, to the left, desert encroachment in the north. And then firewood, which is a main source for energy needs, which when the kerosene, which most families depend on for energy needs, is not available. There is inappropriate agricultural practices and then the destruction of agricultural lands, the creation of borrow pits associated with bad mining practices and construction work. And you will be amazed at this point when you even go to a fast developing city like Abuja and see to the extent which construction and mining work has led to the destruction of the landscape of the federal capital. My organization, the past 5 years, has been very active in monitoring the level of environmental degradation in Abuja. We started with Abuja, but then eventually we moved to other parts of the country, particularly in the northern areas. And then we stumbled the issue of illegal mining in the north western part of Nigeria in a place called Zamfara. And I'm sure most of you may have picked up snippets about the case of lead poisoning in Zamfara state, which came about as a result of illegal extraction of gold dust, and what that did, leading to pollution of water bodies and then contamination of water bodies, leading to lead poisoning, and many children, many women were affected. Another challenge is the occurrence of oil pollution from spillage and gas flaring arising from oil and gas exploration in the Niger Delta areas of Nigeria. Another challenge, urban decay and squatter settlements. This is also an area where we are very active in, looking at issues of human settlements in in urban areas that are mostly favelas. Then industrial pollution and municipal waste generation. More pictures. And the first picture to the top left highlights the environmental degradation arising from construction works in Abuja. Below it, construction work still, but then in a community very close to the State House. Excavation of granites and rocks for construction purposes led to that huge borrow pit, which with seasonal rainfall has become an artificial lake. And then we've seen recorded incidences of women and children that have died, drowned in that lake, going to get water from that lake. To my right here, on the top there is a picture from Zamfara State, illegal extraction of gold from the surroundings and how it is processed directly in their water bodies. And of course, going back to the issue of water scarcity in most parts of the country, these are water bodies that people go to fetch water for domestic use. And below it is a photo on a woman in her farm, and just next to her farm is a gas flare stack. So you can imagine what that gas flare, apart from the what it would do to the environment, but then directly to her health as well. Excellent. Now, this photo was taken 2 weeks ago in Abuja, the one to the top left-hand side there. It was raining, and those women, you can see them lined up with jerry cans, and you'll be wondering, what are they doing in the rain? Now, they are standing close to a gas station. They are trying to get paraffin, kerosene, for domestic use, domestic energy use, because most women depend on paraffin. But down here, when they don't get the paraffin, they are going to be dependent on firewood. So imagine trucks, and we see several trucks, such as this one here, from one part of the country to the other part conveying firewood. So imagine the consequences to our biodiversity. This photo was taken last year. Like I told you, we've been active in working on issues of environmental monitoring, and we organized this field visit to a community in the Niger Delta in a place called Ibada Elume, where there was an occurrence of oil spillage and a fire that came as a result of that spill, and it burnt vast agricultural lands. The trees, they got polluted, the whole area. And this went on for months. The fire that was engulfed this place went on for months and destroyed vast farmland. Climate change scenarios. Now, we've heard from the previous presenter about what climate change is likely going to, the negative impacts of climate change on different countries in the world, but more so on Nigeria. And the risks are particularly high when you look at the coastal areas of the country that has a high percentage of GDP generating industry. I'm talking about the oil and gas industry. And then in addition, the northern part of the country forms the Sahel savanna, which is at risk of further desertification and droughts. This photo is on cattle grazing that was taken by one of my colleagues in one of the northern states. And it shows cattle which are grazing on land that there's practically nothing to graze on. And the tendency now for this kind of, the herdsmen, the tendency would be for the herdsmen to move their cattle away from this area to areas where they obviously will have enough to graze on. And then, the story, conflict again, is a direct consequence because, the cattle would move into people's farmlands, and then we've often read or seen stories or experiences where there has been direct confrontation between the herdsmen and the farmers on whose farms the cattle graze. The depletion of natural resources continues in many parts of the country. Water, land, and biodiversity are under severe pressure. And we have these examples in the depletion of fish stocks, forest cover, rivers, and water bodies, and then, of course, the land. The destruction of crops and animals and fish stocks often leaves farmers in conditions of food and livelihood insecurity. And of course, when I talk about farmers, recall I said 60 to 80% of those who are involved in farming activities are women. And we've seen cases where most of the vulnerable farmers are living in abject poverty as a result of the change in climate, and then are forced to pick up other jobs other than farming for their livelihoods. Now, I want to cite an example, I'll try to rush here, of the Lake Chad, which Tony mentioned in his own presentation. The Lake Chad, over the last 40 or thereabout years, has seriously reduced. And then, of course, when you read about the Lake Chad, you discover that most people around the area, not just in Nigeria, but in Cameroon, in Chad, in Niger, were dependent on the lake for fishing, farming, for irrigation purposes, and for hunting. But then the lake has seriously declined, has shrunk over the years, and then this has led to a lot of migration for those who depended on this lake, moving away to other parts of the country. This is just a pictorial, graphic representation of how much the lake has declined between 1963 and 2001, and it's getting worse. What are the direct gender impacts of all that I have said? And it's simply that women suffer grave consequences arising from these cases of environmental degradation that I have pointed on, much more than their male counterparts. The direct instances manifest in crop failure, declining agro yield, increased work time, and then required for less food and less income for the women. There is fuel shortage, even the firewood. Now, if they can't get the paraffin for their cooking, they would depend on firewood. But then the firewood, because of deforestation and desertification, forest cover is threatened. So it's going to impact seriously, or it's already impacting seriously on women and the search for energy needs. Water shortage, exposure to disease, health challenges, failing livelihoods, leading to school dropouts, early marriages, and then leading to failing life prospects. Now, another set of pictures, and the lack of water and how far these women would go in search for water. This was also taken somewhere in the northern part of the country, in a place where animals even come to drink. And these women are going there to fetch the water. They're not going to use the water for irrigation. They're going to use it for domestic, for drinking and for cooking. To this other side is how the land has seriously been degraded in the Niger Delta. To the bottom left, a woman drying out her cassava by a gas flare stack. And you can imagine what that is going to lead. I mean, of course, the cassava is the purpose is for it to dry quickly because of the heat that is emitted from the gas flare. But then it's going to poison that food. So it's going to have a direct impact on her health. And for those who, if she's going to sell it, of course, for those who are going to buy the cassava flakes. This other picture shows fish that have been washed ashore dead because the sea has been seriously polluted. And then, of course, the degradation of the Niger Delta land is as a result of the activities of oil companies. Women in the Niger Delta, like I've highlighted in other parts of the country, also suffer from adverse effects of environmental degradation. They have to search more for firewood. They have to search also for water. And then the risk of ill health is also borne disproportionately by the women. Now, I use that famous Latin phrase, quo vadis. Where do we want to go? Where do we want to be? And I highlighted a number of issues. Quickly, I'm going to go through them. And the first way is to look at, to think of what proactive steps can we, as a people, the government and all stakeholders, take in climate change mitigation and adaptation. And then, of course, taking gender as a big consideration in these steps. Another point, gender mainstreaming in environmental concerns. There is no data on impact and vulnerability of climate change and gender in Nigeria. As a matter of fact, my organization conducted a research in the northern part on the impact of climate change on gender. But then we are trying, also with the support of some of our partners, to take the country in its totality to look at the impacts of climate change on gender. We also need to look at promote synergy on women participation in environmental issues, disaster risk reduction, for example. Then implementation of capacity building for effective adaptive response. I think this point is linked to the previous one. We have to promote environmental friendly agricultural practices. Climate smart agriculture is one of such, looking at use in organic fertilizer and water harvesting techniques, for example, which also we are pushing and building women's capacities in Nigeria. Promote sustainable deforestation and reforestation programs. The government of Nigeria is looking at some strategies in the clean development mechanisms, and RED is one of the strategies that is being pushed. RED being reducing emissions from deforestation and forest degradation. We also have to employ strategies for sensitization efforts targeted at promoting environmental awareness, proactive response on oil and environmental degradation in the Niger Delta, and not just some form of romantic phraseology. Thank you.
Thank you very much, George, and thanks to all three of our presenters. We'll have some time now for a Q&A, just like upstairs. So I'd ask that you use a microphone so those online can hear, and of course, so Anthony can hear as well. I think we'll also collect a few and then give our panelists an opportunity to respond. Who would like to start us off? Sir. And then we'll go to the middle. So Sky, right down here, halfway down the side.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Atta Benson from Community Emergency Response Initiative based in Nigeria. My question will focus on water. Ametu. First, I will commend your effort in what you've been able to do as regards your focus on the Benue water. But then, we have similar situation across the country. First, I would like to point out that you can't put water without sanitation. There's always this missing link, but a lot of our attention is focused on water, leaving out sanitation. So, and I also like you to focus on this using your position as a journalist. Again, it seems as though they use the water sector as a channel of siphoning resources, of siphoning funds from the government coffers. I'll give you an example. Early last month, we conducted a monitoring activities on water and sanitation project. And you'll be surprised that over in one local government, which is less than a population of about 500,000, over 200 projects were abandoned. Some were unfinished, some were never completed. Then, these other contractors or whoever did them had collected the money and had disappeared, and the communities are left without water. So I would like to use your position to do more in this area as do more of investigative journalism, because it seems, unfortunately, when these projects are being put in place, they don't involve the communities. So the communities are just ignorant of what they should do. Because if the communities are involved in the project that is being brought to their community or their domain, they'll be able to monitor it. They will know who the contractor is. But unfortunately, the communities are not involved. So I would like to implore you to do more in this aspect, not limiting it to Benue. Unfortunately, the story of Benue is not palatable because in a population of about 600,000, they spent $6 million. And that could cover about half of the country when it comes to water supply. So you ask, unfortunately, the project was not completed and the money had disappeared. So this, I will implore you to do more because a lot needs to be done, but as regards the area of water and sanitation. But the focus should water should go with sanitation. They should not put top water alone and neglect sanitation. Thank you.
Thank you. Ma'am in the middle. It's your microphone.
Thank you. My name is Priscilla Chakba from Women Environmental Program. My first comment goes to Tony. Tony, I like your presentation, especially where you talked about the issues of green economy. But for us, as the civil society organization, we see green economy as a capitalist program. And even though we want to see, we buy into it, but we want to see a green economy that is bottom-up approach and that takes into account the issue of equality, the issue of employment, the issue of looking at green economy not replacing the issue of sustainable development. That is the way we are looking at it in Nigeria. And not just in Nigeria, the civil society in Africa are very concerned about the issue of green economy. And then my second question has to do with, you talked about the African Development Bank doing a kind of policy in Nigeria. In particular, what program does the African Development Bank have in relation in working with the private sector, the civil society organization, knowing very well that these sectors of the society complements whatever efforts that the government puts in place. And vis-a-vis, of course, the private sector ensures that the economy is boosted. I have not seen anything. I mean, I didn't hear you say anything about that. But in particular, coming from the civil society organization, what programs do you have? And as the head of gender and climate change, I would like to hear what more programs or what more plans your institution has for women. To Ameto, thank you very much for that wonderful presentation. I come from that part of the state, and I was very pleased that when you are presenting that. And of course, everything you presented was correct. Now, my question has to do with what to collaborate what he said. Most of the times, we talk about issues of water, but the issue of sanitation is grossly neglected. And sanitation in other parts of the world is creating wealth. But in Nigeria, there's nothing like that. In fact, if you go to Nigeria, as beautiful as Nigeria is, there are no public toilets. You go to conferences like this, you want to go to the loo, it's very difficult. And where you go to, it's an eyesore. And yet, we don't highlight that in the public. I think it's time, when we talk about issue of water, we must also place the issue of sanitation, because it's very key. Sanitation is dignity. The men feel very free to do it anywhere. In Nigeria, I mean, it doesn't cost them nothing. They can just go out here and stand there and do their own thing and go away. But for a woman, I'm wearing a trouser. How do I go to begin to undress and sit down and let the people see me? You know, so sanitation is about dignity, and we must begin to preach about it. It's very important. Unfortunately, even the private sector in Nigeria is not a striving, business for them, and we are just wondering what is actually happening, because that is where a lot of money, a lot of financial could be generated, and nothing is happening to it. And then, in the terms of monitoring and evaluation of the Federal Ministry of Water Resources project, I tell you, it's a hurricane, tax, because the corruption that thrives there is huge. We try to monitor their projects, and to even get the information from the federal to the state to the local government is not available. They won't just give you. At a point, we try to highlight this to the media, but of course the media, which you belong to one of them, are not interested in reporting things like this. Majority of them are interested in, oh, there's oil pollution here, yes, oh, that one will make headline. Oh, the government, there's corruption, yes, it will make headline. Oh, this person is contesting. That is what makes headlines. But the issues of development, the issues that affect the people, the issues that affect the ordinary Nigerians, they seem not to be highlighted. And I think these are very key issues. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Priscilla. Should we take those two comments, because there were obviously a couple in there. Ameto, would you like to lead off with the water one, and then we can, assuming, I think, hopefully Anthony heard, and so he can respond.
Yeah, I did.
Thank you so much for the two interventions made. Really, sanitation a lot more focus on water than sanitation, and that's true. And indeed, the focus on Benue, the fact is the situation is the same across the country. However, to sort of bring to light the severity of the situation, I thought, okay, fine, let's focus on one particular issue to highlight others. I would encourage you to go to the website and really read the stories on the Pulitzer Center website, and there's also a link to Business Day as well. You could read more on that. It's the case in Lokoja, in the state I come from, in Edo State, and these are states that are blessed with a lot of water resources. And really, that's one case that really highlights the fact that the water and sanitation crisis in Nigeria is less about the availability of the resource and more about just poor management and poor financial management structure. And then, as you both rightfully said, we should try and focus more on sanitation. But it's not only the government that is not prioritizing water and sanitation, and particularly sanitation. The media houses as well, and that's why organizations like the Pulitzer Center on Crisis Reporting should be commended, because they helped give that push. So I was able to do this investigation. Doing these investigations costs money. You need resources, and a lot of media houses aren't ready to support that. And even when they do not give you the resource to do these kind of investigations, they are not ready to publish the story. I remember the first time I met my editor with this idea to report on water and sanitation. He was like, no, we won't publish that, simple. And then I went back and thought of a way to sort of make it more appealing to him. And because it's a business paper, I thought, fine, let's investigate it within the context of the financial management structure of Nigeria, which everybody knows is quite opaque. And then he finally agreed to pick it up. So yes, more needs to be done. And then it's just that we didn't show the slides. We also, in this story, sort of focused on sanitation as well. Like, remember when we were doing this story, we went to this particular locality in Makurdi, and we're taking pictures. Just a couple of steps away, this man actually was squatting behind a mound, and he was actually defecating into the River Benue. And I will not lie to you, just a couple of steps away, some kids were taking their bath in the water, and the river is actually flowing down this way. They are bathing and they are fetching water and they are washing their clothes, and some kids were actually drinking directly from the water, and you are just appalled, and suddenly the statistics is a lot more real. You know why kids are dying from this illness. You spoke about the Ministry of Water Resources. Really, it's a problem. Monitoring and evaluation, very little is being done. And because I must also say civil society is not taxing them enough. The Freedom of Information Act law is not just for the media. The public needs to do a lot more. We need to start asking them the hard questions. A year ago, they gave several targets, and they promised that by the end of 2011, they would bring 1,000 boreholes to 109 sanitary districts. They promised, there were several targets listed, and on a day before we celebrated the World Water Day, that was March 21st, I actually talked to the minister. I was like, you gave all these targets. How many have, it seems you have failed the sector by not meeting all this. You've not met even one of these targets. And her response was like, no, yeah, we promised these targets, these projects. However, the promise was to sign the contracts and not necessarily bring the projects. I have it on tape. I'm not lying. So, you know, those are the kind of things. So people, I used to say that it's not about foreign donors coming to give us money, or NGOs or civil society. Those things are good. However, the public, we need to take more active role in our destinies and hold the people more accountable. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Mito. In the meantime, here I put up the pulitzercenter.org/waiting-for-water, the site where you can find all those things, all those parts of the story, the multiple parts of the story. Anthony, would you like to respond to Priscilla's other question?
Yes, I like to do that. I said, Priscilla, let me start by thanking you for the excellent work you're doing and highlighting these issues, gender and society issues. But let me also say here that For us, as Nigerians, I'm speaking as a Nigerian and as a developing country person, we have great opportunities because we have seen that the present developmental paradigm that the developed countries have taken have not been sustainable. We have the opportunities to leapfrog into cleaner development. We have the opportunities to, to change the way we develop. That's the beauty of our underdevelopment as we speak. But then, yes, it is true that people are saying that green growth is a northern agenda. Is growth a northern agenda? No. Is it wrong for us to develop sustainably? No. But we do not need to sit back and allow others to define the content of our green growth. I'll give you an illustration. 1997, Africans and other developing countries went to Kyoto and signed up Clean Development Mechanism, CDM. But they did not define what CDM meant to us. They allowed CDM to be defined from a very Eurocentric lens, where their development meant electricity, meant transportation, meant technology, meant industrialization. But to us Africans, the D meant agriculture, meant land use, meant forestry. But these are the things that were excluded from the CDM because we did not participate in defining what development meant. So the Clean Development Mechanism excluded things that were important to our development, knowing that Africa's development for a long time to come will still be driven by agriculture and land use practices. This is our opportunity to ensure that when we define green growth, we do not allow others to define what green growth means. We need to be on the table. We need to define green growth, as you have said. It has to build on the MDGs. It has to be inclusive growth. It has to talk about labor. It has to talk about employment. It has to talk about equity. It has to factor in our natural capital and where we get benefits for our environmental services. That is important to us. Green growth is going to be about optimally utilizing our natural capital. Africa, I keep saying, is a continent of paradoxes, where our natural resources fuel development in other parts of the world and our people remain in abject poverty. How can we change that and allow our natural resources to be used to drive our own development? So I agree with you. I'm not against green growth. You are not against green growth, but we need to define it in a way that is relevant to us. Green growth should be bottom-up driven. It should be defined from the bottom up, and that's what it will be. Green growth is not a one-size-fits-all. It's not going to be something that when you see it, you say, this is it. Each country is going to define its own pathway based on its own national circumstances, and I think that is the way to go. In terms of what the bank is doing to support private sector and CSOs, one of the difficulties I've found is that many of our people have never bothered to go to the African Development Bank's website or stopped in any of our offices to really want to interact with the bank, to know what the bank does. African Development Bank, I must say, without fear or favor, is Africa's premier developmental finance institution. But then it is a government bank. That's the difference between what we do and a commercial bank. Shareholders are countries. We keep countries' monies in trust for the countries, and then we give loans to the countries. I have always stressed that countries have three ways or three avenues to developing. Governments set policies private sectors will need to drive the engine of growth. The civil society organizations need to be the watchdog, and all this need to work in partnerships. But we have seen, until very recently, I was responsible for the gender issues in the bank. I was responsible for civil society organizations. We have a very strong civil society group, coordinating committee in the bank that works with so many other civil society organizations. These have been self-selected. But then it is so difficult to work with every civil society in Africa, every civil society organization. Even when we say, let's do a self-selection, we know that if people that are selected don't go back again to report to their larger constituencies, we need to get closer. So I encourage civil society organizations, get closer to the African Development Bank offices in your countries. Like in Nigeria, we have a very big office in Abuja. Stop by that office. Find out what the bank is doing. We have a private sector unit in the bank that supports private sector because we know the private sector is an engine of growth. And we also try to encourage civil society organizations not to be antagonistic to governments. See government as a partner. Work with governments as partners. And let us see how together with civil society, with government and the private sector, we can ensure growth in Africa, growth in our respective countries. We have programs for them. This is not the forum to list the specific things we do, but we actually do have a very strong civil society program. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Anthony. I have to apologize. We've run over, and because of the richness of the presentations and two very excellent interventions, I think what I'll suggest we do is we take an abbreviated coffee break. I encourage you to come talk to Ameto and George, and we'll enable you to follow up with Anthony in email and such. Take our quick coffee break and then come back for our final panel. We want to make sure they have time for their session as well. Join me in thanking our presenters for this panel, please.